Welcome to today's Explainer. We're actually going to skip the usual agenda today because we need to jump straight into what is, without a doubt, one of the most high-stakes, dramatic, and truly consequential political stories of the 20th century. We are looking at the life, the grueling trials, and the completely unprecedented political ascent of Benazir Bhutto.
I mean, just think about this for a second. How exactly does a 24-year-old Oxford graduate survive the absolute horrors of solitary confinement, to then turn around and become the first female elected to head a democratic government in a Muslim-majority country? The historical stakes here are just massive. And to really understand how she pulled this off, we have to look at how she was forged by two completely, wildly different worlds.
So, let's get right into Section 1. Aristocracy and academia. Born in 1953 in Karachi, Benazir Bhutto grew up with, honestly, unimaginable wealth. She was part of this deeply aristocratic family, and her life is a story of extreme, whiplash-inducing contrasts. Imagine going from the carefree bubble of university life. We're talking high society dinner parties, spirited debates, and literally breaking barriers as the first Asian woman president of the Oxford Union. And then just a few years later, being thrown into the brutal, punishing reality of Sukkur prison. She endured solitary confinement, severe health issues like anorexia, and massive psychological trauma. You've got to keep this stark contrast in the back of your mind, because it is the tension that defines her entire story.
You know what's truly wild? Just how early she was groomed for the global stage. Her father, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, who founded the Pakistan People's Party and eventually became prime minister, totally immersed her in his world from day one. In fact, her first language was English. By the time she was 13 years old, she'd already met geopolitical giants like Henry Kissinger and Zhou Enlai. In 1972, she even filled in for her ailing mother and accompanied her dad to the India-Pakistan summit at Simla. There, she's shaking hands with Indian Prime Minister Indira Gandhi and soaking up all this international press attention. She was literally being trained to operate on a global level.
And her education? Absolutely top tier. She showed up at Harvard University when she was only 16. While she was there, she wasn't just hitting the books. She was joining the Crimson Key Society, protesting the Vietnam War on Boston Common, and even working as a campus tour guide. After Harvard, she crossed the pond to Oxford to study philosophy, politics, and economics, followed by international law and diplomacy. At this stage in her life, she's this brilliant, globally minded student who hasn't really experienced the harsh domestic realities of her own country. Her actual plan? She just wanted a quiet career in the Pakistani Foreign Service. But history, as we know, had completely different plans.
Which brings us to Section 2, the fall, coup, execution, and opposition. Okay, so it's June of 1977. Benazir finishes her time at Oxford and heads home to Pakistan. Within barely a month, her family's political dynasty is violently ripped apart by something called Operation Fair Play. This was the code name for a military coup led by the Chief of Army Staff, Mohammad Zia-ul-Haq. Her father, who had literally just been re-elected, was overthrown. General Zia suspended the constitution overnight, bringing in a regime that merged strict military rule with heavy Islamization programs. It fundamentally, irreversibly changed the country's political DNA.
Let's quickly map out this chaotic timeline, because things move terrifyingly fast here. After the 77 coup, her father is executed in 1979. By 1981, Benazir creates a formal political opposition group. But that exact same year, an armed group tied to her brothers hijacks a plane, which the regime uses to throw her into a brutal imprisonment. Finally, in 1984, after an immense amount of international pressure, she's released into exile.
We really need to pause on April 1979, because this is the absolute heart-wrenching turning point in her life. Her father was charged with conspiracy to murder a political critic, and the trial went all the way to the Supreme Court. Now, former U.S. Attorney General Ramsey Clark actually observed this trial, and he flat-out called it a kangaroo court, saying Zulfikar absolutely did not get a fair shake. Despite massive pleas from world leaders, her father was executed by hanging. This devastating, earth-shattering moment is what forced Benazir to reluctantly but fiercely take up his political mantle as the co-leader of the PPP.
So, what does she do? She channels that horrific grief into highly structured political action. In 1981, she formed the Movement for the Restoration of Democracy, or the MRD. And this was a genius move because she managed to unite even the political parties that used to hate her father, bringing them all together against Zia's regime. They had a very clear four-point agenda: end martial law, restore the 1973 Constitution, hold parliamentary elections, and transfer power back to elected representatives. Simple, focused, and powerful.
And that takes us into Section 3, the crucible, imprisonment, and exile. Now, while Benazir is busy organizing this peaceful democratic opposition, her brothers, Murtaza and Shahnawaz, have formed a militant group abroad called Al-Zulfikar. In 1981, they hijack a Pakistan International Airlines flight. Even though Benazir completely condemned the hijacking, the government seized on it as an excuse to arrest both her and her mother. And the toll this took on her was just horrific. She spent months upon months in Sukkur prison in solitary confinement. We're talking severe physical and mental breakdown, hair loss, anorexia, deep psychological trauma. It wasn't just jail, it was meant to break her. But international allies, especially in the US, finally pressured the regime enough that she was released in early 1984.
Once she gets out, she's forced into exile and ends up living in a flat in London's Barbican estate. But she is not taking a break. Not even close. She literally transforms this apartment into the unofficial global headquarters for the PPP, rallying international support and shining a spotlight on political prisoners back home. Friends from that time said she was still carrying a lot of trauma, constantly jumping at sudden loud noises. And the tragedy didn't stop. In 1985, her brother Shahnawaz died under very mysterious, totally unexplained circumstances over in Cannes. But incredibly, she just kept going.
Which brings us to our final chapter. Section 4, The Triumphant Return.
In December 1985, martial law is finally lifted in Pakistan. So, by April of '86, Benazir makes the call. It's time to go home. She lands at the airport in Lahore, makes her way to Iqbal Park to give a speech, and, well, just look at this number. 2 million people. 2 million people showed up. It's enough to give you chills. This massive, unprecedented crowd made it undeniably clear that she was a wildly popular champion of democracy for the Pakistani people.
But she knew she couldn't just coast on the energy of a single rally. She campaigned absolutely relentlessly across the provinces, and she made a very strategic pivot here. While her father's PPP was deeply rooted in socialism, Benazir took what she learned in the West and shifted the party's platform toward liberal, Thatcherite economics. She took on fierce, deeply entrenched conservative opposition, outworked them, and in December 1988, she won. She officially became the prime minister.
I want to wrap this up with her own words reflecting on that historic '88 victory. She said, "The people of Pakistan had rejected bigotry and prejudice in electing a woman prime minister. The forces of destiny and the forces of history had thrust me forward." Her journey from the incredibly privileged halls of Oxford to the absolute darkness of a solitary cell, and finally to the highest office in the nation, is a masterclass in resilience. But it leaves us with a really provocative thought to chew on today. When the forces of history thrust a leader forward out of such a violent and turbulent past, how on earth do they balance the heavy, lingering weight of that trauma with the democratic promise of the future? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, stay curious, and I'll see you next time.